How does that work? What is that?
Body yada 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 yada. Body yada 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 yada. Body crazy curvy wavy big titties little waist. Body crazy curvy wavy big titties little waist. Body yada 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 yada.
Damn it, Wade!
If you couldn't tell from the title already, I do not like She-Hulk. I had no interest to watch this when the trailer came out and was really only going to see it because it's in the MCU. I like to keep up with some of this stuff, no matter how low some of their entries may be. And I know there are some people who genuinely enjoy it, and if you did, I'm glad. But I didn't. I don't even have any funny joke or bit to go with this. This show just annoys me so much for so many reasons. So insert joke or funny comment here. Okay, let's get this one over with. There are only a few things I can actually give She-Hulk some credit for. I really like the fact that it actually acknowledges some of the stuff that's happened in the MCU. I feel like Phase 4 has been pretty isolated with all of its entries. Like a lot of these things aren't really connected. But She-Hulk actually acknowledges some of these events, so I'm glad that's the case. The other thing I can give this show some credit for is how it's structured. Pretty much all the MCU shows at this point have just been really long movies. Which isn't a bad thing per se, but you can tell some of these shows just did not need to be 6 episodes long. She-Hulk actually feels like a show, where each episode follows a different plot and isn't entirely connected to one another. Unfortunately, the episodes themselves are dog shit. Like yeah, okay, the show actually has episodes and not parts. But I can't really give that too much credit because the stuff that actually happens in said episodes is bland and forgetful. Let's start with the plot. There is no plot. The show follows Jennifer Walters and her adventures of being She-Hulk. While the episodes do spend a lot of time actually making it important that a random citizen just becomes a superhero pretty much overnight, it doesn't happen in a very interesting way. There is only one episode where the plot revolves around how being a superhero affects Jen's life in an engaging way. The rest of the show just doesn't really put that much effort into it. The show also has no focus on what it wants to do. It has a build up towards an overarching plot involving a main villain, but it's hardly set up well. There's like 3 episodes with one scene in each of them to remind you that there is something that's gonna happen, but that is not engaging in the slightest. The episodes themselves are so boring it hurts. Instead of actual personal issues that can come with being a superhero, like what episode 7 did, we get episodes about copyright of the name She-Hulk, and She-Hulk going to a wedding, and She-Hulk doing whatever the fuck happened in this episode. I don't know what happened, I don't remember. The episodic nature of the show actually hurts it because the episodes are so forgetful that you don't really remember anything about them. This style of episodic storytelling works in sitcom shows where stuff actually happens in them, and it's very obvious that She-Hulk is trying to be a sitcom. Sitcoms have both funny and wholesome moments in them because that's what they're meant for. Speaking of comedy, there's none in this show. This is the most basic normie humor I've ever seen. Most of the episodes just consist of one gag and the entire episode will just revolve around that gag. Haha, this one's funny because she talks weird and has a stupid ass catchphrase that I'm gonna post on my Facebook account about how much I love Madison. Who the f is this show for? Seriously, who is the target audience here? This show talks a lot about sex and sexism in the world, but also has these terrible ass middle school jokes. The fourth wall breaking is especially worthless. Fourth wall breaks are pretty much entirely meant for comedic purposes. They're meant to pull you out of the story because it's unexpected for a character to acknowledge the audience, but it is completely pointless here. All she does with it is either state whatever is happening in the scene, or taking a crack at something MCU related. Neither of these are funny, or at least they aren't done in a funny way. Looking at the camera and going, oh, this is like a thing I've seen, is lazy. It is Family Guy level of humor. And making jokes about the MCU could be funny, but instead, all they do is make fun of the fact that the fans wouldn't like She-Hulk, as if that's smart. Just because you could predict people wouldn't like your show does not give it an excuse to be bad in the first place. The CGI looks as good as it did in the trailer. The characters are barely even characters and no one learns anything. I don't remember a single name out of any of these characters except this guy. His fucking name is Pug! Jen starts off the show with,
I'm great at controlling my anger. I do it all the time. When I'm called in the street, when it comes to men explaining my own area of expertise to me, I do it pretty much every day because if I don't, I will get called emotional or difficult or might just literally get murdered. So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you. So all of this just feels like projecting a lot of shit
that, and besides episode 7, she pretty much doesn't change at all. She's just a lawyer. Speaking of which, the writers apparently didn't include many courtroom and law scenes because it was too hard? Huh? I'm pretty certain the writers of Gravity didn't know shit about how space or astrophysics works. It's called research? Is it asking for too much for writers to actually research how courtrooms are done for their law show? I'm pretty sure that's what Daredevil did. Speaking of Daredevil, he was by far the most hyped up part of this show, and I actually finished the Netflix show this year because of his inclusion. Him showing up in the trailer got a lot of people talking, but I knew not even he could save this bland-ass series. It's not as if he was ruined in this show. Far from it, but there's a lot of people who think otherwise. I personally think people are overreacting when it comes to this episode, and that goes for both people who hated it and people who think it was the best. The people who didn't like it were probably expecting an actual Daredevil episode, as if this show was going to be able to live up to that. It's going to take more than a few cheesy lines of dialogue to ruin Daredevil for me. And the people who absolutely loved it really only do because Daredevil is in the episode, but he doesn't really do much in it. He has a decent courtroom scene, an okay fight, sleeps with She-Hulk, and then leaves. I feel like a lot of people forget that this episode's main conflict was whether She-Hulk was going to lose her tailor or not. While Daredevil is indeed in the episode and gets some of the spotlight, it's hard to really like it when the show's mediocrity still haunts it. This episode, like the rest of them, has very little stakes. I can't possibly be engaged in a show where I know very little will happen by the end. Speaking of the end, man, I'm just gonna roll with these transitions today. That finale, holy fucking shit. I can't even, it's mind-boggling is what it is. This show has the lamest build-up to a villain, and then it turns into a basic-ass superhero ending where all the characters just start fighting, and it's messy as hell, you know, it's like an early MCU project. But here's where it gets off the fucking rails. She-Hulk then breaks the fourth wall, goes into the real world, criticizes her own ending as well as the rest of the MCU, and then the show just ends happily ever after. What the hell am I watching? Let me say it again. Just because you are self-aware of how poorly written your show is, does not make it smart to constantly bring it up. It makes your show seem like a joke. This just seems like the biggest slap in the face to anyone who is actually engaged in this story. Like, what the f was the point of the show then? Yeah, the build-up and characters are completely terrible, but then you just throw it away for a stupid gag? Was the entire point of She-Hulk just to criticize the MCU? Was that the end goal? Because the show didn't build up to that either. It barely built up to its original ending. Completely wiping your messy-ass ending just to replace it with an even lamer one isn't how you write a f***ing story. They ironically made the ending messier by acknowledging it's messy. It's just insane to think about just how hypocritical the show is. How about instead of writing a bad show on purpose and then pointing out that it's bad because you think it's funny, what if She-Hulk was actually good? Because the idea of She-Hulk breaking the fourth wall and criticizing the MCU sounds really fun. What if each episode was just She-Hulk challenging an MCU stereotype, like how bad guys get the same power as the hero, or how there's too much CGI, or how everyone has bad parents or something? I don't know. That sounds really entertaining to me, but instead, we get this schlop. Or better yet, how about we do what Werewolf by Night did? I feel like a lot of the MCU shows could have benefited from a 1-hour special instead of a long-ass series. This special gave us a creative tone and atmosphere, a thrilling setting, entertaining characters. It was just so well done, and I hope we get more stuff like Werewolf by Night instead of She-Hulk. Now, I know this video has been pretty negative and I've just been railing this show for a while now, but I can't help it. This show ironically makes me feel angry. Even some of the worst MCU content usually just makes me feel nothing or annoyed, but not this show. I don't know why She-Hulk exists. It has barely any character development, cringy humor, zero stakes, a messy plot that constantly brings up that it's messy, a lack of focus on what the show wanted to do. I gained absolutely nothing from watching the show. So you know what? She-Hulk gets a 1 out of 10 and Werewolf by Night gets an 8. Go watch that instead.